Your shadow feels instant. When you lift your hand, it seems like the dark outline on the floor or wall responds at the exact same moment. But the truth is far stranger. Ultra-high-speed cameras, the kind capable of capturing billions of frames per second, have revealed something unsettling. Your shadow hesitates. Not by a second, not by a millisecond, but by a tiny slice of time so small your brain was never meant to notice. Nanoseconds. A nanosecond is 1/billionth of a second, a unit so small it barely fits inside imagination. Yet these cameras expose it clearly. The shadow lags. To understand this delay, imagine a beam of light not as something instant, but as something traveling. Light moves fast, insanely fast, at approximately 299,792,458 meters per second. But fast does not mean instant. When you move your hand, photons streaming from a light source must travel to your hand, get blocked by it, and then continue toward the surface where the shadow appears. That journey, even though incredibly fast, takes time. And the delay becomes visible when we have a machine capable of slowing reality down enough to reveal what the eyes were never meant to witness. One researcher described filming a shadow under a controlled environment with a 10 trillion frames per second camera. At that speed, light behaves less like a smooth ray and more like a slow, creeping pulse. When the researcher waved their hand, the shadow didn't mirror the movement perfectly. Instead, it trembled. It waited. It updated after light caught up. Something about that video felt unsettling, almost uncanny, as if the universe had exposed a glitch it never intended for us to see. Our world runs like a perfect script, until you slow it down enough to watch the machinery underneath. But here's where things get even stranger. The delay isn't just the speed of light. There's also the way our brain processes what we see. You don't see reality as it happens. You see it as it was a fraction of a moment ago. Your brain takes around 13 milliseconds to interpret visual information. That may sound small, but compared to nanoseconds, it's practically a lifetime. So your shadow isn't just delayed. Your perception of your shadow is delayed even more. The camera picks up truth faster than your senses ever will. Imagine standing in a dark room with a single bright light above you. You move your hand slowly, and on the wall, your shadow responds. But high-speed footage tells us that if someone could watch that moment in extreme slow motion, your hand would move first. Then the darkness would reshape itself. The world would look like two realities struggling to stay connected. The physical body and its dark replica constantly trying to sync. Some scientists argue that this delay is evidence of something deeply fundamental about the universe. Information cannot travel faster than light, not even the absence of light. In a way, your shadow is obeying the same laws that govern galaxies, black holes, and quantum fields. The delay is a signature of physics at work, a reminder that we are living inside a system with boundaries. But others take the idea further. They ask, if a shadow is just the absence of photons, why does it behave as if it has processing time? Why does it behave as if it needs to update? Why does it seem to refresh like a rendered frame inside a simulation? When video games render motion, objects redraw themselves frame by frame, and sometimes, usually only detectable during bugs or slow processing, the shadow updates slightly after the object. It's a tiny lag, a fraction, a stutter in the system. The nanosecond delay captured by ultra-high-speed cameras may be the universe's version of that stutter. Maybe shadows aren't as passive as we assumed. Maybe they're not just darkness, they're timestamps. They reveal the speed limit of reality. They expose that nothing in existence is truly instant. Everything takes time. Every object, every movement, every flicker, all of it is delayed by the universe processing information. When you move, your physical body leads, your shadow follows, like an echo of motion rather than a duplicate. There's a subtle eeriness to realizing this. For your entire life, you believed your shadow was bonded to you, a silent companion responding without thought, without delay, perfectly synchronized. But the more we study it, the more it behaves like something separate, something bound to the rules of light rather than the rules of your movement, something with its own timing rather than yours. So, the next time you walk outside and the sun creates a long version of you stretching across the ground, pause for a moment. Move your hand just slightly. Somewhere, in a scale too fast for you to grasp, there is a moment where reality splits. The movement begins, and then, only after the universe allows it, the shadow catches up. Now, consider how ancient cultures used shadows to measure time. Sundials were not based on motion you could see with your eyes, but motion happening slowly, invisibly, governed by celestial mechanics. But what if they were capturing something else? Not just the position of the sun, but the delay between movement and response. If ancient observers had the tools we have today, would they have noticed that shadows lag behind reality itself? Some theories suggest that observing the delay could help us understand how consciousness perceives the universe. Because if the universe updates reality in fragments, just like a computer renders a scene in layered processing steps, then we are participating in a reality built from sequential information. Every movement becomes a packet of data. Every shadow update becomes proof that existence is rendered one frame at a time. Ultra-high-speed cameras aren't just filming shadows, they're filming the refresh rate of the universe. Imagine a future where cameras continue to evolve and reach unimaginable frame rates. What happens when we reach a point where we can film the speed of thought, the formation of a memory, the firing of a neuron creating an idea? If shadows already reveal a delay, then perhaps everything, even consciousness, includes these invisible transition states we've never been able to witness before. There is also a psychological effect tied to this discovery. When people learn that their shadow has a measurable delay, many report a strange feeling of separation, as if the shadow is no longer just a visual effect, but a secondary self, slower, quieter, and always slightly late. A version of you that exists half in reality, half in the space where light has not yet reached. When scientists played slowed-down shadow delay recordings to volunteers, some described it as haunting, as if they were watching themselves from outside time. Yet the delay is not a flaw. It is a trace, a record of the interaction between matter and photons, a signature that you are real, physical, bound by the laws of the universe. If your shadow moved instantly, if there were no delay, physics would break. Every time you move, you create a disturbance in the field of light around you. Your hand interrupts photons, your body shapes darkness, and the world adjusts in its own time. You are not moving alone. The environment responds to you, acknowledging you. So, the next time you lift your hand, remember, there is a version of that movement happening on a scale smaller than time as you understand it. A silent delay. A microscopic chase between light and shadow. A proof that nothing, not even darkness, can outrun the universe's laws. And maybe, just maybe, that delay is the closest we ever get to seeing reality raw, unprocessed, unfiltered, before the brain, before perception, before meaning. A fraction too late, your shadow tells the truth, because in that tiny delay, there is something profoundly human. It reminds us that we are part of a system larger than ourselves. We are ruled by rhythms and limitations we cannot feel. Your shadow is not late. It is honest. It is showing you that even motion has a cost. Even speed has a ceiling, and even light must bow to time. And in a world where everything feels fast, chaotic, and immediate, that silent nanosecond gap is a reminder that the universe takes its time, even if we can't see it happening. So if one day you stand under a single source of light and gently move your fingers, know that somewhere in that invisible micro-lag, the universe is calculating. It is confirming. It is updating reality around you with precision beyond imagination. And for one impossible moment, you exist in two states, the motion that has already happened and the shadow still waiting to catch up. That space between movement and reflection is where truth hides, not in the darkness, but in the delay, because the universe is not rushed. It does not hurry. It does not panic. It unfolds at the only pace it can, the pace of light. And every time your shadow follows you, even just a fraction too late, it is whispering the oldest rule written into reality. Nothing is instant. Everything takes time. And somewhere in that delay, the universe breathes. A shadow is never late. It arrives exactly when reality allows. Under sunlight, a shadow behaves in a way that feels ancient, predictable, almost natural. Human beings evolved under sunlight, and somewhere deep in our subconscious, we trust the way shadows behave outdoors. When the sun is your light source, the shadow stretches, moves, and reacts in a way that feels smooth, continuous, and intuitive. But when you step indoors and switch on an LED light, something strange happens. The shadow doesn't move the same way. Sometimes it splits into multiple outlines, sometimes it flickers. Sometimes it appears sharper than reality itself, as if edges are being calculated rather than cast. And if you wave your hand fast enough under certain LED lights, your shadow doesn't follow the graceful motion you expect. It jitters, disappears, or even duplicates, as if something is wrong in the rules of how reality should behave. Most people never question it. They may laugh, shrug, or assume it's just poor lighting. But behind that simple observation lies a deeper truth. Sunlight and LED light are not the same kind of illumination. They are entirely different languages of light. Sunlight is continuous. It flows as a steady, uninterrupted stream of electromagnetic waves from a massive thermonuclear engine burning 93 million miles away. Every shadow shaped by sunlight is controlled by a consistent, unified source. LED light, however, is digital. It pulses. It flickers at frequencies too fast for the human eye to detect, yet not too fast for matter, shape, or motion to respond to. When you stand under the sun, the photons hitting your body have traveled in straight, uninterrupted paths from the source. They hit your form, cast a clean boundary behind you, and carve out the absence of light we call a shadow. But an LED doesn't emit light as a smooth flow. It turns on and off, rapidly, continuously, millions of times per second. Your eyes see a steady glow, but reality sees something else, a strobe, a constant flicker. And because your shadow isn't created by perception, but by physics, it responds to the truth, not what your eyes are capable of noticing. If you record yourself under an LED lamp using a high-speed camera, you might see your shadow appear and vanish in rhythm with the pulsing light. As you move, the shadow may seem to lag behind or leap forward, depending on the phase of the pulse. Sometimes, especially under cheap LED bulbs, you might see multiple shadows, each belonging to a slightly different pulse, angle, or edge of the diode cluster. It's as if you don't have one shadow, but many, layered copies of absence waiting to synchronize. Under sunlight, shadows behave like a natural extension of the self. Under LED lighting, shadows behave like something processed. One researcher studying perceptual physics filmed a person waving under 3 different light sources: sunlight, incandescent light, and LED illumination. Under sunlight, the shadow was smooth. Under incandescent light, another continuous wave source, the shadow remained soft and stable. But under LED lighting, the shadow trembled like a digital ghost. It stretched sharply, then softened, then split, then flickered as if trying to decide which version of the body it belonged to. The unsettling part is this: your brain corrects it. Your visual cortex smooths the broken edges, fills in missing frames, and forces continuity onto something that isn't continuous. Meaning, the shadow you think you see under LED lighting is not the one that is physically there. You are editing reality unconsciously so you don't have to confront how strange it actually behaves. Some scientists argue this difference is purely technical. LEDs flicker because of alternating current and modulation frequencies. But others believe the phenomenon reveals something deeper, a boundary between natural systems and human-made systems. Sunlight is analog. LED light is digital. One belongs to a universe that existed before life. The other belongs to a world built by a species attempting to recreate illumination artificially. And artificial systems carry artificial signatures. If you were to wave your hand under sunlight on a mountaintop, your shadow would stretch softly across the rocks with perfect consistency. If you were to repeat that same motion under a cold LED streetlight at night, your shadow might fracture or flutter in a way sunlight never allows. Some people describe this difference with words like wrong, uncanny, or synthetic. They don't know the physics. They only feel something is off. Children notice it first. There are videos online of toddlers playing under LED lamps with 2 or 3 shadows trailing them. They respond with confusion, fear, or fascination. We dismiss this as innocence, but perhaps what's happening is simpler. Children see what adults have learned to ignore. Some ancient cultures believed shadows were extensions of the soul or spirit. Losing one's shadow, or seeing it behave unpredictably, was seen as a sign that something was interfering with the boundary between the physical body and the unseen. If those same cultures saw LED shadows flicker or multiply, what would they conclude? Would they blame spirits, technology, or Would they think reality itself was thinning? There's another unsettling layer. LED lights are programmable. They can be dimmed, pulsed, modulated, or synced to frequencies. If someone alters the frequency high enough, shadows may distort in ways we've never observed. What if one day the light in a public space is adjusted to a frequency that exposes something we were never meant to see? The delay, the fragmentation, or even patterns in the way shadows update reality. Some footage from scientific labs already suggests that under extremely high flicker modulation, shadows can reveal micro-delays in motion similar to the nanosecond lag captured in ultra-high-speed recordings. Under sunlight, those delays are smooth and uniform. Under LED, they become pixelated, like watching reality low resolution. Think of it like a frame rate. Sunlight is infinite frames per second. LED lighting is capped, limited by hardware and circuitry. Your shadow becomes sharper under LEDs because the boundary between illumination and absence is computed rather than naturally diffused. The edges aren't just cast, they're calculated. That sharpness makes LED shadows feel unnatural, almost too precise. Sunlight allows soft gradients. LED light creates binary contrast, lit or dark, present or absent. It is the language of ones and zeros, and some people notice something else. When they stand under a single LED bulb in a dark room and stare at their shadow long enough, they feel disconnected from it. It behaves like a separate entity, something following rules instead of following them. They move slowly and watch the outline shift with slight hesitation. The delay is small, but enough to trigger something ancient in the nervous system, a primal warning that something isn't aligning. If sunlight connects us to the natural rhythm of the world, LED light reminds us we're living increasingly inside a constructed environment, a world where shadows are no longer silent followers, but visual symptoms of artificial systems shaping perception. Maybe one day when high-speed cameras become as common as smartphone cameras, more people will begin to notice the difference. They will see that the shadow cast under sunlight is a natural echo of their presence, while the shadow under LED lighting is a processed artifact, a digitized version of something that should be raw and continuous. And maybe in that moment, they will ask a question most people never ask. If artificial light creates artificial shadows, then what part of our perception, our environment, our understanding of reality, has one already been replaced by the artificial without us noticing? Because a shadow is not just darkness, it is evidence. Evidence that light exists. Evidence that matter is present. Evidence that the universe is responding to you. Under the sun, the universe responds gently. Under LEDs, it responds like a machine. And somewhere between those two versions of reality, analog and digital, continuous and pulsed, your shadow reveals which world you're standing in. One feels eternal, the other feels programmed. There is an old idea that appears across cultures, scattered in ancient stories, whispered in forgotten rituals, and buried in mythological symbolism, the belief that every living being has not one body, but two. The first is the physical form, the one made of bones, skin, breath, and movement. The second is something more elusive, more silent, more mysterious. Some cultures called it a spirit double, others called it a shadow soul, and in some ancient traditions, it was known as the echo body. A presence that follows you, lingers behind you, observes you, and trails your actions with the slightest delay, just like a shadow moves a fraction too late. In folklore, the echo body wasn't just symbolism. It was believed to be a real companion, your quiet twin that never spoke, never aged differently, never left your side. It moved when you moved, slept when you slept, and waited when you hesitated. But it was always just behind you, never fully aligned, never perfectly synchronized. The echo body represented something the physical form could never fully understand, the subtle distance between existence and awareness. Ancient Egyptian beliefs described a concept called the Ka, a spiritual duplicate that lived alongside the physical body. It was believed that the Ka mirrored every action, like a shadow walking just behind reality. The Egyptians believed that if the Ka ever separated too far from the physical self, confusion, misfortune, or spiritual imbalance followed. The echo and the flesh had to remain close, or the universe fell slightly out of tune. In Norse mythology, there was the Fylgja, a spirit double that followed warriors and rulers. It could appear in dreams or visions just before an important destiny unfolded. Some warriors swore they once saw their echo body move before them in battle, as if fate was demonstrating the next step before their physical self took it. When the delay between body and echo became noticeable, it was considered a sign that reality was shifting, that something significant was approaching. Some indigenous cultures believed shadows weren't merely the absence of light. They were windows where the echo body was visible. The belief was simple. The shadow is not just darkness. It is the border where the invisible body finally becomes seen. And across Asia, especially in early Tibetan and Mongolian teachings, there are references to a secondary subtle form known as the wind body. It was described as the part of you that responds just after intention, but just before motion, the part of the body that exists in the space between thought and physical command. Some monks trained for years to feel the moment where intention becomes movement, the tiny fraction where the echo body and physical body negotiate which one leads. In modern science, this idea suddenly feels less mythical when we consider how the brain operates. A thought occurs before the body acts. Signals travel through nerves, synapses, and electrical pathways before the limb finally moves. There is a delay. Small, invisible, but measurable. The physical body waits for neural commands. And some researchers argue that consciousness isn't inside the action. It travels with it, slightly delayed, like an echo following sound. One study on motor intention found that the brain begins preparing a movement milliseconds before the conscious mind becomes aware of the decision. Meaning, your body knows what it will do before you do. You live inside a rhythm where sensation, decision, and action are never perfectly aligned. There is always a shadow of timing, something following, or perhaps leading, with a delay too small to detect without tools. Mystics found symbolism in this, scientists found timing, but folklore saw identity. Some believed the echo body was a temporal memory, a record of your past movement still existing a fraction of a moment after the physical self moved forward. Others believed the echo body was the future self, the version one step ahead in time, guiding the body like a reflection walking into tomorrow. One chilling belief from Eastern Europe called this echo body the doppelganger. Not the horror film version, but a subtle energetic twin that moved fractions slower. Seeing it wasn't normal. It was said you could only perceive it during altered states, moments of illness, grief, sleep paralysis, or intense emotional awakening. People who claimed to see their echo body often reported an uncanny sensation, not fear, not confusion, but recognition, as if they were watching something familiar yet forgotten. In some African cosmologies, the echo body was called the second shadow. It didn't appear physically, but spiritually. Healers claimed they could sense it, the delay between a person's vibration and their motion. The more aligned the two shadows were, the healthier the person was believed to be. When they separated, illness appeared. There are modern psychological parallels. Phantom limb syndrome, where amputees still feel a limb that no longer exists, reveals the nervous system holds onto a second body map, a blueprint, a memory body, a part of you that continues to exist even when the physical version no longer does. In that phenomenon, science meets myth. The physical body ends, but the echo body remains. Could it be that the ancient world wasn't speaking metaphorically? Could echo bodies have been early interpretations of something we still struggle to understand? The lag between perception, movement, identity, and awareness, the invisible timing that governs reality, the gap between intention and existence. If your shadow moves late because light takes time to respond, perhaps your consciousness moves late because reality takes time to register your presence. Perhaps the echo body is not supernatural at all, but a measurement of the universe processing you. Some researchers studying simulation theory point to this idea as evidence. If reality refreshes in frames like a digital render, then everything, including identity, updates in layers. Movement first, sensation next, awareness last. The echo body becomes the residual trace of previous frames, like a ghosted afterimage in animation. If that is true, then every step you take leaves behind a trail in time, a version of you suspended a fraction of a moment behind existence. You are never only the person acting, you are also the echo trailing behind, the vibration remembering movement. Some spiritual teachers describe moments of deep meditation when the physical body and the echo body align perfectly. Time slows. Breath stabilizes. The self feels whole. The delay disappears. Everything feels smooth, synchronized, weightless. They say that is the moment when the echo stops chasing and becomes one. So maybe the myths of echo bodies were never about ghosts or spirits. Maybe they were ancient attempts to describe something subtle but universal, the distance between the self we experience and the self-reality records, the difference between motion and awareness, the lag between existence and reflection. Maybe every shadow you cast, every flicker under sunlight, every fragmented silhouette under LED isn't just a visual effect. Maybe it's a reminder that you are never fully here in one single moment. You are stretched slightly across time, existing in the now and the fraction before now. And maybe the reason these myths survive thousands of years is simple. On some level, people sense that there is always another version of themselves, silent, delayed, attentive, walking just behind the physical form. Not separate, not supernatural, just slightly out of sync. A body made not of matter, but of timing. An echo of the self. Most people think a shadow is simple. One body, one silhouette, one dark outline following shape and motion. But during sleep paralysis, something unsettling happens. People report seeing not one shadow, but two. One that stays close to the physical body, and another, slightly delayed, slightly distorted, hovering or standing just beside the first, as if reality momentarily loses track of which version of the person is the real one. Some describe it as a second silhouette rising slowly from the original, like a duplicated identity trying to detach. Others say the second shadow doesn't mirror them. It watches them. It stands at an angle, turned toward the bed, silent and waiting. Sleep paralysis has always been a doorway between the conscious and subconscious mind, a fragile state where the body is frozen, but awareness remains active. In that trapped moment, the brain struggles to separate dream from waking world, memory from presence. And it is in this in-between state that the phenomenon of the second shadow appears. Doctors call it a hallucination. Neurologists blame misfired sensory mapping. But survivors, especially those who have experienced it more than once, tell the story differently. They don't describe it as imagination. They describe it as recognition. One person said they woke in the middle of the night unable to move. Moonlight filled the room, and their shadow appeared clearly on the wall beside them. But then, slowly, another shadow formed. Same height, same outline, but delayed, like someone pressing rewind and replaying their existence. When they tried to blink, the real body couldn't move, but the second shadow twitched first, almost as if it wasn't following them, but leading. They describe the moment not as fear, but as a strange awareness. There are two versions of me, and only one is stuck in the body. Stories like this appear globally, across languages and cultures. People who have never met describing the same thing. A duplicated shadow emerging during paralysis. A shadow that shouldn't exist. In scientific terms, one explanation suggests the brain creates a body schema, a neural representation of the self, used to predict movement before the body acts. During sleep paralysis, the physical body is frozen due to REM atonia, so when the brain sends signals expecting motion, there is no response. The result? A perceptual glitch. The brain generates a phantom version of the body, visualized as a shadow, to reconcile movement signals and stillness. In other words, the second shadow is the brain showing you the echo of the motion you can't perform. But if that were true, why do so many people describe the second shadow acting independently? Some say it leans closer. Some say its head tilts. Others say it walks around the bed, examining them. One described theirs stepping forward while the original shadow remained still, as if the second form was deciding whether to return or to leave without them. There are cases where the second shadow appears not beside the first, but layered, like a double exposure photograph. A faint silhouette slightly behind or ahead of the first, displaced by mere centimeters. Witnesses describe it like the universe rendering two frames of existence at once. Some researchers suggest this phenomenon is connected to disturbances in the temporoparietal junction, the region of the brain responsible for spatial orientation and the sense of ownership over one's body. When this area misfires, the brain may interpret the self as external. But even scientists who support this explanation, admit something strange. People report seeing the second shadow only during paralysis. Not during waking hallucinations, not during normal dreams, not during stress or illness. Only when the mind is awake, but the body is frozen. Why that moment? Some sleep researchers believe paralysis reveals the mechanics of consciousness, normally hidden processes that synchronize awareness and physical form. In waking life, the mind and body move as one, but in paralysis, they drift apart. The shadow becomes evidence of that separation. Some ancient cultures knew this state well. In early Filipino folklore, sleep paralysis was called bangungot, and the present scene during paralysis was believed to be the alagad, the spirit twin or echo self. In Ethiopia, the second shadow was seen as the Selit, a silent companion soul that followed humans until death. If someone saw it move independently, it meant the boundary between body and spirit had temporarily weakened. In medieval Europe, it was believed that seeing two shadows meant the soul had not returned fully from the dream world. The second shadow represented the part of the self still wandering, still dreaming, still elsewhere. Modern simulation theorists offer a different perspective. During paralysis, the brain processes reality slower. The world feels delayed, heavy, fragmented. If our world operates like a rendered environment, normally the system updates identity in perfect sync: body, perception, memory, movement. But paralysis breaks that sync. The body freezes while consciousness remains active, revealing something normally invisible, the delayed version of the self, the leftover render frame. It's not impossible that the second shadow is the perceptual trace of who you were milliseconds ago, colliding with who you are in the immediate moment. Some people report that when the second shadow appears, the room feels different, not haunted, but heavier, denser, as if the air itself acknowledges the extra presence. Breathing becomes shallow, time feels slower, and the distance between thought and physical response becomes painfully noticeable. It is in that moment that many describe a strange intuition. The second shadow is not just a visual artifact, it's a placeholder, a reminder that the mind is not inside the body. It is connected to it, tethered but separate. There are rare cases where people claim the second shadow fades slowly, like smoke dispersing into the room, only after movement finally returns. A few say they felt a pull in their chest or spine as the shadow merged back into the physical form, like alignment being restored. And then there are the most unsettling accounts, the ones where the second shadow doesn't disappear at all. It steps into a corner, lingers, watches, or vanishes like a quiet breath in darkness, leaving the person with a silent question they cannot shake. If that wasn't just a hallucination, if that second shadow was part of me, then where did it go? Maybe sleep paralysis reveals something fundamental about existence, that we are never fully singular, that there is a boundary between consciousness and physical form, a delay, a division, a duality we never notice while awake. Maybe the second shadow isn't a ghost or a hallucination. Maybe it is the moment your consciousness separates enough for you to see the part of yourself that normally stays hidden, the echo self, the delayed version, the shadow that does not just follow, but remembers. And when you finally move again, when paralysis breaks and breath feels real, that second shadow slips back into place, silent, unseen, until the next time your awareness wakes before your body. Then, once again, you may meet the version of yourself that exists half in this world, and half a fraction of a moment behind it. There is an old line that appears in scattered pieces of folklore, spoken in villages, carved into stones, whispered as warnings, and repeated like a strange truth no one fully understood. Your shadow walks in tomorrow. At first, it sounds poetic, maybe symbolic, maybe even harmless. But the more you sit with it, the stranger it becomes. If your shadow exists in tomorrow, then the version of you casting it must belong to something stretched beyond the present moment, something already stepping into the future before the physical body arrives. In many ancient societies, a shadow wasn't treated as a passive shape of darkness. It was treated as evidence of a person's timeline, not just who they are now, but who they are becoming. People believed the shadow was a kind of early messenger, a subtle outline that knew the next moment before the brain or body did. The physical body lived in the now, but the shadow lived one heartbeat further. There are old stories from the Middle East where travelers refused to journey at sunrise because they believed the morning shadow belonged to the next day. They feared stepping forward before the shadow fully realigned, believing the universe needed that moment of synchronization. In China, some scholars referred to the shadow as the ink of time, claiming it recorded your future steps before your feet touched the ground. Even the Greeks had a term, skia metra, meaning shadow measurement, describing a strange belief that the shadow anticipated change, sometimes by moments, sometimes by days. One forgotten Celtic proverb says, "The body is here, the spirit is near, but the shadow walks ahead." To them, the shadow wasn't darkness. It was a map of intentions. Actions begin first in the unseen and only then in the physical. So the shadow was not a reflection. It was a preview. Some of the oldest rituals around this belief involved observing the shadow at dusk. In rural Siberia, elders taught children never to step on their own shadow during twilight. It wasn't superstition. It was fear that stepping on it would interrupt the connection between the present self and the future self, as if crushing the shadow meant rejecting the tomorrow waiting for them. Instead, they allowed their shadow to walk slightly ahead, giving it distance, space, permission to prepare the path. There are also unsettling legends, the kind told quietly, like warnings rather than wisdom. In parts of Eastern Europe, villagers believed that if someone's shadow stayed behind after they walked away, or if it appeared lighter or slower than usual, it meant their destiny was already moving faster than their body. Some believed it was a sign of early death, not because death was approaching, but because the shadow had already crossed the threshold before the person did. A strange parallel exists in modern science. The brain often begins preparing movement before the body executes it. Studies show a neurological signal that fires milliseconds before conscious awareness, meaning your decision to move happens before you think you made it. In a way, the body is already in the next moment while the mind is still catching up. The ancient phrase, "your shadow walks in tomorrow," may be an early interpretation of the delay between action and awareness. A poetic explanation of timing the brain was not yet technologically capable of measuring. Some indigenous cultures in North America describe the shadow as the walker between worlds. One elder once explained it like this: "When you move, you disturb time. The shadow shows where you are going before you get there." They believed the shadow could slip into the next moment and return with warnings. If someone ever dreamed their shadow was missing, it meant they were living too fast. Their future self could no longer keep up. And yet, in other traditions, the idea wasn't frightening. It was comforting. In old Hindu teachings, the shadow was sometimes referred to as Chaya Purusha, the shadow person, believed to be the version of you already knowing the path. Your physical body was the student. Your shadow was the guide. When someone felt lost or directionless, they were told to walk during sunset, that moment when the shadow stretches longest, symbolizing the future stretching out before them. But not all stories are calm. In some African myths, there is a belief in a shadow divorce, a moment when the physical body and its timeline separate. When this happens, the shadow walks too far ahead, leaving the person restless, confused, or emotionally hollow. Villagers said the person was walking without tomorrow, meaning the future was no longer attached. To restore balance, they performed rituals involving firelight, because fire casts unstable dancing shadows, reminding the body and future self to reconnect, to synchronize, to return to the same timeline. The eerie part? People experiencing sleep disorders, trauma, or dissociation report similar feelings, a sensation of being ahead or behind themselves, as if their life and their body are no longer aligned. They describe it almost the same way ancient cultures described a wandering shadow. Simulation theorists interpret the phrase differently. To them, the shadow walking tomorrow hints at buffering, reality generating the next frame before the current one finishes. The shadow becomes a residue of future instructions, a preview rendered ahead of the self to guide continuity. The body is the user. The shadow is the loaded next scene. There are also countless stories of premonition involving shadows, footsteps seen before someone walked, shadows appearing before the person entered a room, silhouettes lingering long after someone left. Most would call these ghost stories. Some would call them hallucinations. But to those familiar with the old folklore, these moments are reminders. The shadow isn't just a consequence of existence. It is part of the architecture of time. Under sunlight, your shadow behaves soft, patient, almost wise. Under artificial light, especially harsh LED lighting, the shadow acts differently, flickering, fracturing, delayed, as if artificial environments interfere with whatever silent communication exists between present and future self. Some researchers even wonder if the reason artificial shadows feel slightly off is because they cannot fully represent temporal flow. They show shape, but not timing. So, when the elders said, "Your shadow walks in tomorrow," they weren't just describing darkness. They were describing the quiet truth that you are not fully contained in the present moment. A part of you, whether neural, spiritual, temporal, or simulated, exists slightly ahead. Your life is not a single point in time, but a continuum, and your shadow is the only physical reminder of that stretch. Maybe that's why we never outrun our shadow, not because it chases us, but because it leads us. It goes ahead to carve the next second before we step into it. And perhaps that is the most haunting part. Not that the shadow follows, but that it waits, always a fraction ahead, already standing where your next breath will happen. Because somewhere woven into existence is the strange truth the ancients whispered thousands of years ago. Your body lives in today, your awareness lingers in the past, but your shadow always walks in tomorrow. At first glance, light seems untouchable, absolute, flawless, constant. For most of history, humanity believed photons behaved the same everywhere, forever, no exceptions. Light moves at the cosmic speed limit. Nothing outruns it, nothing delays it, nothing alters its timing. But then came CERN, a place where the rules of reality are not sacred but testable, a place where physicists point unimaginable forces at the building blocks of the universe and ask a question humans were never supposed to ask. What happens if reality itself is pushed hard enough to glitch? When CERN began running beam tests involving ultra-high energy particle collisions, some researchers decided to measure something most people would consider pointless: the response time of photons generated at different points in the collider. The expectation was simple. The photons should appear and travel with perfect consistency. Yet, the measurements told a different story, a story subtle, microscopic, and almost unbelievable. The photons didn't respond at the same speed. There were tiny variations, not in distance, not in energy, but in timing. On paper, the photons should have appeared instantly at the moment of collision, but instruments measured delays in the femtosecond range, trillionths of a second. And as strange as that sounds, the deeper the experiments went, the stranger the pattern became. It wasn't random. It behaved like a variable. Sometimes the photon delay stretched longer. Sometimes it snapped back. Sometimes it curved, accelerating or decelerating, as if time itself were slightly flexible around extreme forces. Some described it quietly as bent time. Others whispered privately about an even more unsettling possibility. Light isn't constant. It adapts. Under low-energy environments, photons behave obediently, predictably. But under conditions that warp space, pressure light into quantum thresholds, or alter vacuum stability, their timing wavers like reality hesitating. The collider chambers at CERN create conditions similar to the early universe. Moments after the Big Bang, where energy density was so high that the laws of physics were still forming. So, when photon timing shifted, some physicists believed they were witnessing something ancient, the universe remembering how to form light. That concept alone is strange, but the implications go deeper. If the timing of photons can change, even by unimaginable smallness, then shadows are not instant, nor are they perfect. They depend on a world where light behaves consistently. And if light can hesitate under certain conditions, then maybe shadows are not just passive absence. Maybe they are reflections of timing. CERN researchers eventually began deliberately altering variables: magnetic fields, exotic particle streams, vacuum pressure, and the photon response shifts followed patterns. Under certain arrangements, the photons appeared slightly earlier than expected, almost as if the information of their appearance traveled ahead of them. That raised a very dangerous question. Does information move faster than light, even when the light does not? One theoretical physicist described it like this: the photon seems to know where it will be before it gets there. It felt wrong. It felt impossible. Yet, the data was there. Not fiction, not speculation, but measurable deviation. Some speculated this effect might be tied to quantum entanglement, where particles separated by distance behave as if connected by something beyond space. Others wondered whether the vacuum, the empty space between matter, has hidden structure that light interacts with. A few raised a more radical idea. Light isn't just movement, it's communication. The delay might be the universe processing interaction before finalizing it. The photon is the outcome, but something else, something invisible, makes the decision. Those who study simulation models notice something familiar. The behavior resembled system load balancing. When a processor renders a scene, the first frame may load slightly slower, adjusting to the complexity of objects, forces, and interactions. Once stabilized, responses smooth out, like the system adapting to demand. CERN's photon timing shifts looked eerily similar. The more complex the collision, the more the delay. The more fundamental the particles involved, the more pronounced the timing discrepancy. And then came the most disturbing observation. When the particles tested involved antimatter, the photon delay didn't just alter, it inverted. Instead of responding late, the photons seemed to respond early, as if anticipating the event. Reality moved as if rehearsed. Some scientists refused to discuss that publicly. Others tried to frame it mathematically. But a few admitted quietly that the data matched something philosophical, almost spiritual. An ancient idea resurfaced, one that cultures have whispered for thousands of years, but never scientifically tested. Light comes from beyond time. If photons behave differently under extreme conditions, if their timing shifts, bends, anticipates, or lags, then perhaps time is not the fixed container we thought it was. Perhaps it is flexible, negotiable, responsive. And if time is responsive, shadows, which depend entirely on the presence and delay of light, may reveal these distortions. Some researchers theorize that if CERN expanded photon delay research, humanity might eventually observe time dilation not with clocks, but with shadows, slight lag patterns appearing under different conditions. Imagine this. As gravity, motion, or environment changes, your shadow updates slower or faster. You wouldn't see it in normal life, but under high-speed cameras, under repeat environments, under controlled testing, a pattern might appear. Perhaps your shadow already demonstrates subtle time distortions, faint hints of how reality processes you. And maybe the only reason we've never noticed is because we've never pushed light hard enough to reveal its hidden behaviors. The unsettling idea is this. If shadows reflect photon response, and photon response can bend, then shadows may show the timing structure of the universe. A quiet measurement of when reality decides something has happened. Not when you move, not when light touches you, but the moment existence acknowledges it. Maybe that fraction too late movement isn't just the limit of light speed. Maybe it's the lag of a system calculating the next frame of reality. CERN didn't break light. It simply revealed that light isn't passive, obedient, or absolute. It responds. It adapts. It hesitates. It anticipates. Just like a system. Just like a script. Just like something that isn't merely existing, but rendering. So, when shadows move late, when they flicker, hesitate, or fracture, maybe they are telling us something the universe has hidden since the beginning. We are not watching reality. We are inside it. And sometimes, if the conditions are extreme enough, the code shows. There are ancient temples scattered across the world that seem to share a strange architectural theme, despite being separated by oceans, languages, cultures, and centuries. They were designed to cast two shadows from a single person. Not one, not none, two. Archaeologists officially describe it as dual light alignment, but older writings call it something more haunting, soul tracking. At first, it sounds poetic. But when you walk through one of these temples, when you stand exactly where the builders intended a human to stand, something unsettling happens. A flame burns on one side. A natural beam of sunlight enters from a slit, crevice, or engineered gap on the other. When you look down, you don't see a single shadow merging smoothly with the environment. Instead, two silhouettes appear. One is crisp and dark, one faint and stretched, as if illustrating something inside you that normally remains invisible. Some believed the second shadow represented the future self. Others believed it was the spiritual double, the echo body that walked slightly ahead of the physical form. And in the rarest traditions, the second shadow was not a reflection of something already present, but a measurement of something trying to separate. Many temples displaying this architecture appear in places obsessed with life, death, and what exists between. The Great Temple of Luxor in Egypt, certain chambers beneath Angkor Wat in Cambodia, a ritual courtyard inside the Nalanda University ruins in India. Even Proto-Incan constructions in the Andes hold faint traces of the same design, a layout where sunlight and firelight intersect at controlled angles, forcing a human body to cast two separate shadows. To ancient architects, light wasn't just illumination, it was a tool for understanding the unseen. Egyptian priests believed the first shadow belonged to the living body, Khat, the temporary vessel of the mortal world. The second shadow belonged to the Ka, the eternal twin self. Their prayers reference moments where the second shadow revealed misalignment. A distorted shadow meant the soul was restless. A missing second shadow meant the spiritual self was disconnected. But the most frightening condition was recorded rarely, when the second shadow appeared closer, sharper, or more dominant than the first. That condition was called the soul walking ahead. In Cambodian temple inscriptions, the faint secondary shadow was referred to as the long shadow. It symbolized the self that walks beyond perception, the part of you that dreams, remembers, predicts, or exists outside your awareness. Monks trained for decades to stand in the dual light chamber without flinching, breathing steadily until their two shadows merged. They believed that when the shadows aligned perfectly, the mind reached perfect clarity. The inner and outer worlds finally synchronized. But there were rituals where alignment was never the goal. In some forgotten Tibetan monasteries, dual shadow rooms were used to detect spiritual imbalance or mental fragmentation. A novice would stand still while the master observed the movement of the shadows. Many described unsettling outcomes, the second shadow flickering even while the physical body stood motionless, as though reacting to thoughts rather than movements. One monk wrote that the second shadow sometimes stepped before its owner, as though impatience lived inside the soul. The most intriguing versions of this architecture appear in pre-Columbian ritual tunnels beneath Peru. The walls contain narrow shafts carved with precision, channeling light from above ground through angled stone pathways. At specific times of day, the shafts align sunlight and torchlight into a single ritual point. The moment someone stood there, two shadows formed on the wall, one razor-sharp, one soft like fog. Some researchers believe shamans used these temples during initiations. The dual shadows served as proof that a person possessed both a physical and metaphysical form. When the faint shadow shifted independently, which recordings suggest sometimes happened, the ritual proceeded. When it did not, the person was considered unready. In ancient Hindu texts, something similar appears. References to the Chaya Purusha, the shadow person, believed to accompany every soul through lifetimes. Certain temples were built to test awareness of this second presence. You were meant to stand silently until you could sense, without looking, the distance between the two shadows. What's strange is that modern light science explains the temple architecture perfectly. Sunlight emits a continuous spectrum, producing soft gradients, while firelight flickers rapidly, producing sharper contrast. Combined at controlled angles, the result is two shadows, one responding to steady illumination, one to fluctuating illumination. And yet, the effect remains psychological, emotional, spiritual, almost supernatural. People who stand in these temples today still report unusual sensations, their heartbeat slowing, their sense of time stretching, their awareness becoming hyper-focused. Some describe feeling as if the second shadow is not following them, but waiting for them. A few report something more bizarre. When they move slowly, the faint shadow doesn't move at the same speed. It lags, a fraction too late, just like modern high-speed cameras capturing shadow delay. This is where ancient mythology collides with modern science. If shadows carry timing information, if they reveal the processing rhythm of light and motion, then dual shadows might reveal different streams of that timing. Sunlight, soft and continuous, reflects the present. Torchlight, flickering and unstable, reflects the micro-lag of perception. Thousands of years ago, without modern physics, without cameras, without quantum theory, some civilization, or perhaps many, recognized that humans do not exist solely in the present moment. Part of us trails behind in memory. Part of us reaches forward toward intention. The dual shadow was not decoration. It was measurement. Measurement of alignment. Measurement of identity. Measurement of the boundary between who we are and who we are becoming. In some temples, carvings show a small detail many people overlook. In certain depictions, the faint shadow is drawn larger than the physical body. Archaeologists once assumed it was symbolic exaggeration, but spiritual practitioners believed it meant the soul covers more space than the body, that the unseen self occupies a wider dimension, unconstrained by physical boundaries. Some ancient philosophers believed that at the moment of death, the shadows finally separate permanently, one remaining with the world, one moving forward beyond time. There is a line from a fragment found near Luxor that reads, "The body breaks, the first shadow fades, the second continues walking." It's haunting because it feels familiar, like something whispered through human intuition, long before science tried to make sense of time, consciousness, and identity. Today, when people visit these temples without knowing their purpose, they take photos and laugh at the novelty of double shadows. They do not realize that what they're experiencing may be one of humanity's first attempts to detect the invisible, the delay, the echo, the divergence between flesh and awareness. Somewhere deep inside those stone walls, built with impossible precision, ancient architects encoded a question we still struggle to answer. Where does the self end, and where does the shadow begin? And maybe the real mystery is not that these temples create two shadows. Maybe the real mystery is how their builders knew that humans were never meant to have just one. When people experience what's called a solar hallucination, a visual distortion triggered by staring at intense light, especially the sun, something strange happens. The world doesn't blur all at once. It doesn't fade evenly. It doesn't dissolve in a smooth wash of brightness. Instead, one thing disappears first, long before shapes, colors, or facial recognition fail: your shadow. The dark outline that has followed you since childhood is the first thing to vanish, as if the brain erases the boundary between you and the world before removing anything else. At first glance, this seems like a harmless optical quirk, just biology protecting the eyes, just the rods and cones overheating. But the phenomenon is consistent across regions, cultures, ages, and eras. When light overwhelms perception, the shadow is the first casualty. That pattern alone feels intentional, almost like a rule embedded deeply into the machinery of vision. And the more we study it, the more unsettling the explanation becomes. Shadows aren't just absence, they are contrast. Your brain uses them to determine where objects begin and end, to measure distance, to track motion, to confirm that you exist as a separate form from the environment. Shadows tell the brain this is you, and that is the world. So, when solar overstimulation begins interfering with the visual cortex, the very first thing the brain disables is the sense of separation. People describe the experience differently. Some say their shadow dissolves slowly, like sand falling apart. Others describe it as blinking out instantly, as if someone deleted it. One person said they watched their shadow fade until there was nothing, yet their body remained vividly real. They said it felt like losing gravity, like existence becoming unanchored. Neurologically, the explanation is tied to contrast sensitivity. The brain detects edges, outlines, and motion by processing differences in brightness, not by processing light itself. When the retina becomes flooded with excess solar stimulation, it begins suppressing low-contrast information first. Shadows are pure contrast, no texture, no color, just boundary information. So they vanish. But there's a deeper, stranger layer. During solar hallucinations, the world sometimes becomes hyper-flat. Objects feel painted, distant, or unreal. Some describe a feeling like the world becomes a 2D image, and without a shadow, the body loses dimensional reference. Your brain relies on shadows to compute depth unconsciously. Without them, the sense of being grounded collapses. In extreme solar hallucination episodes, especially those described in desert survival accounts, the disappearance of the shadow becomes emotional. People report panic, confusion, or an eerie calm that feels unnatural. One explorer in the Sahara wrote in his journal, "When my shadow was gone, I felt like I was no longer in reality." Ancient cultures noticed this too. In some desert tribes, the moment a traveler no longer saw their shadow was a warning sign, not of physical danger, but of spiritual drift. They believed the soul could detach under intense sunlight, and the vanishing shadow was the first sign that part of the self was stepping outside time. In Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime narratives, staring too long at harsh sunlight could cause the shadow self to step into the spirit world temporarily. They warned, when the shadow leaves first, the body may follow. Whether metaphor or memory, the resemblance to reported symptoms today is unsettling. From a psychological standpoint, the vanishing of a shadow attacks a primitive survival instinct. Every organism with vision tracks silhouettes to navigate the world and avoid threats. Removing that information feels like removing the rules that protect you. Some neuroscientists suggest that when a person loses visual access to their shadow, even briefly, the brain enters what could be described as a dissociative state. The boundary between self and environment becomes uncertain. The world feels unreal. You feel unreal. But there's another possibility, one that aligns strangely with simulation theories and quantum perception models. If the brain renders reality through layered interpretation, shapes first, then depth, then meaning, shadows may be the first layer, the foundational grid. When the system overloads, it disables non-essential processing first. Shadows are optional. They represent timing, presence, and boundary, but not immediate survival. So the hallucination process begins by erasing the layer that separates individual identity from the environment. Some researchers studying near-death experiences reported the same phenomenon. Patients who regain consciousness after cardiac arrest sometimes mention that before reality collapsed, their shadow vanished. The parallel is eerie, as if the brain, when approaching threshold states, follows a predictable shutdown sequence. Light overwhelms the senses. Boundary disappears. Then, identity begins dissolving. There is also a curious observation. Children experiencing solar hallucinations describe the disappearance differently from adults. Adults say, "My shadow disappeared." Children say, "My second me went away." As if subconsciously the shadow isn't just darkness, it's a presence, a silent companion whose absence feels like abandonment. In mystical traditions, losing a shadow was symbolic. In Tibetan texts, shadow loss was associated with the ego dissolving into universal awareness. In ancient Greece, philosophers believed shadows were reflections of a person's timeline, existing slightly ahead or behind the body. To lose one meant falling temporarily out of sync with the universe. Today, most people will never experience their shadow disappearing, not fully, not consciously. And yet, many people experience miniature versions without realizing it. Standing on snow under bright sunlight until the shadow weakens. Walking on a bright beach until the silhouette melts into the brightness. Looking at a mirror in harsh light until the edges of the reflection blur. And in those moments, even if brief, something silent inside notices the absence. Your body remains. Your light remains. But the boundary between you and the world disappears. Because maybe the shadow is not just a shape. Maybe it is an anchor. A bridge between physical presence and the processing of existence. When solar hallucinations remove the shadow first, they are not erasing darkness. They are erasing separation. They are removing the marker that tells the mind where the self ends. And when the shadow returns, slowly, gradually, as the light normalizes and the brain recalibrates, there is a moment of relief, a strange grounding, a sensation like reality stitching itself back together. Your outline returns, your presence becomes solid again, and the silent truth becomes visible once more. You never notice how important your shadow is until the moment it disappears. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? The idea that the shadow isn't simply the absence of light, but the visible trace of a version of you that exists in another time frame. The more we study timing delays, perception lag, neural processing, photon response variation, and ancient symbolism, the more this question stops sounding poetic and starts feeling like a theory we were never meant to articulate. Because think about what a shadow fundamentally is. It is not nothing. It is information. It is the exact boundary where light attempted to pass but could not, because you were there first. But what if that boundary doesn't just mark physical space? What if it marks temporal position? Modern physics suggests reality doesn't unfold continuously, but in discrete frames, like a film reel. You don't experience motion. You float from frame to frame so quickly your brain stitches the illusion of flow. If that's true, then you aren't a single version of yourself. You are a sequence, a trajectory, a cascade of micro-identities shifting through time. So what if the shadow reveals the gap between frames? What if the faint delay, the tremor, the hesitation is not because light is slow, but because you aren't fully synchronized with yourself? Some scientists exploring the block universe theory suggest all versions of you, past, present, future, already exist, layered like transparent sheets. The conscious version of you only rides one position in the stack, but the edges bleed, the boundaries blur. The self leaks forward and backward across time, and shadows, especially those strange second shadows, delayed silhouettes, or flickering duplicates, might be the projection of the next version of you appearing before the current one finishes existing. A shadow, then, becomes a timestamp, the difference between where your body is and where your identity is becoming. There are three ideas that push this forward from imagination to uncomfortable plausibility. 1. The brain acts. After the body studies show the brain registers a decision after the body has already begun acting, meaning a future version of you moved first. Consciousness arrives later, narrating, not directing. Your shadow may follow the physical movement that the future you already enacted. 2. Quantum delayed choice experiments. At the quantum level, particles behave differently depending on future observation. A future choice alters past physical behavior. Cause doesn't always precede effect. A shadow may be the imprint of a version of you whose existence is interacting with the world milliseconds, or lifetimes, ahead. 3. Ultra-slow motion footage of shadows. When movement is slowed to the extreme, shadows sometimes respond as if calculating, not mirroring. It's as though something updates, first the body, then the outline, then the universe accepts the change, almost like a rendering buffer, a timing handshake between the self you are and the self that's forming. If reality is rendered, if perception updates in pulses, if photons wait for the universe to finalize events, then what you see as a shadow may be the difference between frames, the you who exists now and the you who exists a fraction ahead. In ancient traditions, this was not confusing. It was expected. Shamans called it the future twin. Mystics called it the time double. Folklore called it the echo. The Greeks called it the psyche eidolon, the soul image. In Tibetan belief, it was the body of tomorrow. And in many ancient languages, the word for shadow is the same as the word for spirit. Not metaphorically, literally. So could shadows, especially the delayed ones, the doubled ones, the ones that appear independently, be projections of another version of you existing in the next frame of time. Not supernatural, not metaphorical. Just visible evidence of reality updating. A boundary where the universe briefly shows you that you are not a single continuous being, you are a timeline, a file loading, a present stretched between what was and what will be. Your shadow may not follow you, it may precede you, and what you see on the ground isn't darkness. It's the outline of the next iteration of your existence, the preview of the self stepping into the next frame, a silent reminder that you are always arriving, a fraction of a moment late. When you move, your shadow follows. Not instantly, not perfectly, but with that subtle delay the universe hides inside everyday motion. Most people never notice it. But if shadows are echoes of timing, fragments of future frames catching up to the present body, then there's a disturbing question hiding beneath the surface. When your shadow finally catches up, what does it carry with it? Because if the shadow is a projection of the you that exists slightly ahead, a preview of motion, a reflection of intention, a temporal imprint, then every time it lags and reunites, something transfers between those versions of you. A quiet exchange, a memory swap between timelines. Some traditions believed shadows recorded more than movement. They recorded moments. They believed your shadow watched everything before your conscious mind computed it. In African cosmology, the shadow is called the chi, half destiny, half witness. It sees what you aren't ready to see and holds what your waking mind cannot process yet. The idea wasn't poetic, it was practical. The shadow remembers the things we skip when we live too fast. There are old Inuit stories claiming shadows absorb emotion before the body does. If someone walks through grief, rage, or terror, their shadow carries it first, so the soul can survive the shock. When the shadow finally catches up, slowly or suddenly, the emotion returns, softened, delayed, digestible. Modern psychology accidentally echoes these ideas. Trauma studies show the body responds to events milliseconds before the brain forms the memory. First comes reaction, then meaning, just like movement and shadow. So maybe shadows don't remember events, they remember impact. They remember the hesitation before a decision, the impulse you ignored, the truth you sensed but denied, the version of you that existed one step sooner. If the body belongs to the present, the shadow belongs to the moment just before it crystallizes, the unspoken, the unacted, the almost. Some neuroscientists studying timing perception describe consciousness as a stitched narrative. You don't experience reality immediately. Your brain buffers it, assembles it, and delivers a polished timeline. The lag between stimulus and awareness is invisible, unless you look at your shadow. So when the shadow catches up, it may carry fragments of what happened in that invisible window, those micro-instances where instinct knew something before thought arrived. The shadow holds the pre-memory. Ancient Tibetan manuscripts suggest something fascinating. If a person walks too far out of alignment with their shadow, meaning if their choices contradict intuition for too long, the shadow begins storing the rejected versions of their life. The versions where they said yes instead of no, the versions where they chose truth instead of comfort. They believed the shadow was not just memory, it was mirror fate. And sometimes, when the shadow catches up violently, for example, during grief, collapse, awakening, or paralysis, those stored alternative paths rush back as déjà vu, visions, dreams, or sudden emotional clarity. Some people describe moments in life where something finally hits them, hours, days, or years late. Regret, realization, or understanding arrives not gradually, but all at once, as if a version of themselves that already experienced the event returned carrying meaning. Some call that maturity, some call it intuition, some call it divine timing. But what if it is simply your shadow finally catching up? Simulation theorists propose a different perspective. If reality renders in frames and the shadow is evidence of refresh rate, then, when the shadow aligns perfectly with the body, it represents a moment where the self collapses into a single timeline. No lag, no buffering, no split between intention and action. In those rare moments, deep flow state, meditation, life or death clarity, people report heightened awareness, timelessness, or unity. What does the shadow remember then? Everything. All layers, all versions. Because then, there is no separation between the self that acted and the self that knew. Some say rare individuals throughout history walked in perfect alignment with their shadow. Prophets, poets, warriors, monks. They weren't ahead or behind themselves. They moved as one uninterrupted frame of existence. And in those legends, the shadow didn't just remember the past. It remembered the future. So when shadows catch up, maybe they were not returning information. Maybe they're returning alignment. Maybe a shadow remembers the moment the universe almost chose differently, the instinct buried beneath conditioning, the version of you that didn't break, didn't doubt, didn't forget. Because shadows don't remember facts, they remember timing. They remember the rhythm between who you were, who you are, and who you are becoming. And maybe that's why, when you stand still long enough, silently, without distraction, the